Welcome to Rex's Bible Minute, a weekly video where I talk about Jesus, Christianity, and anything along those lines, really. I don't know if you realize this, but this video goes live the exact same time as our Bible study happens in person, where I teach the same content. It's a little different, but because of that and the amount of time it takes to export and to upload, I don't have time to re-record this and make sure I'm in focus. That's kind of the downside of doing this all solo, but that's okay. I'm going to put the Bible verses up the whole time, except for the moments when I'm showing you things that you'll need to see, and you'll understand that when you see it. But that's what's different, is I'm out of focus the whole time for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. It is what it is. But yeah, so enjoy.
Christianity and anything along those lines, really. We are still in our Bible study on Thessalonians, and we are getting to chapter 4. And so, as always, I want to make sure we recap where we're at, make sure the train of thought is right, because this is a real letter written by real people in a real place in history. And so this is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church in the city of Thessalonica. It's still there. It's in northern Greece today. It was the capital of a region called Macedonia. For some reason, I can't remember which one it is right now, but it was a province in Rome, and it was given special privileges, and it was really rich, and it was really powerful. And Paul came into town and did what Paul does, shook things up, preached the gospel, and got run out of town. And so he wasn't able to be there very long to establish a church, and he fled to Berea, got run out of town, went to Athens, left there, went to Corinth, still could not make his way back. And so he sent Timothy, one of his students, his disciples, one of the guys he really trusted and poured into. And Timothy went and kind of tried to pick up where Paul had left off, and eventually Timothy goes back to Paul, we're assuming in Corinth, and kind of fills him in on what the church is like, what it's been doing, how it's been doing, and brings some questions and concerns the people had for Paul. And so the first 3 chapters of the letter, which we've already studied, if you missed them, go back and watch those videos, they're dealing with that. Right, they're dealing with basically recapping Paul's thoughts, how proud Paul is of them, what some of the things Timothy has said. It's basically just one long prayer that kind of just meanders in and out of, recapping the situation, explaining why he can't come to them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get to chapter 4, and this is kind of like where Paul picks up where he left off. Right, this is where Paul. He kind of starts to answer some of their questions, reading between the lines. He doesn't say, you ask this question, but it's kind of like, but concerning this is more the tone that he uses, the phrasing he uses. And it seems like he's answering their questions a little bit. And so chapter 4 and chapter 5 are really instructional. It goes from being recap and just, admonishing and encouraging to being instructional. Like, this is, all right, this is the next step. This is how you continue to live the Christian life. That's what this is. And so we're going to be in chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. That's all the further we're going to get. Now, this whole chapter deals with 3 things concerning living the life a Christian should live. We call that holy living in a way that is pleasing to God. And that's essentially what holy is, right? The word holy, saint, sanctification, those all have the same meaning, that you're being set apart. As Christians, we're called to be holy, set apart as God is holy. So we need to be set apart in a way that is pleasing to God. That's what this means. We need to live our life according to God's standards and what God likes, and avoid what God dislikes. And so that's what these are. These are kind of Paul communicating in regards to sex, money, and death, God's standards, and how to live your life in a way that is pleasing to God. And so last week we talked about sex. So if you want to know what Paul said read it and then go back and watch those videos, or video per se. This week we're going to be talking about money. And I kind of want to approach it a little differently. You can get into the discussion of money within Christian teaching and it become a Dave Ramsey kind of lecture, if you know what I'm talking about, the financial freedom. And I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey and what he teaches. But that's kind of outside the scope of what Paul is talking about here. Paul is very brief, and he gives us kind of like, here's the core principles, the why, like why money at all? Why do we care? Why should the Christian care? That kind of thing. So we're going to go look at that. We're not going to get into the whole, like, should we tithe? Should we not tithe? How much should we be saving? How much should we be giving? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's for a different time. That's not what Paul addresses here. He addresses the why more so than the what. All right? So let's read it, and then we'll get into it. It's starting verse 9, chapter 4. It says, "Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been doing this to all the brothers throughout Macedonia." There's my answer. It's not Macedon, it's Macedonia. "But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly, and to mind your own affairs, and to work with your own hands, as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders, and be dependent on no one." All right, so we're dealing with money, right? Now, before we get into that, I want to do a little bit of teach you how to read your Bible, right? Because this is one of those verses, specifically verse 9 is one of those ones that if you do a Google search and you're looking up something specifically and it's Google will tell you this verse says that, and you try to teach somebody that or say, hey, this is what that means, and you don't read the rest of the paragraph, you just taught something that Paul never intended it to be taught. Right? You're teaching something wrong. Now, the thing you're teaching in principle would be right, but what you're teaching, the verse you're using doesn't support the argument. So what does it mean? If you read verse 9 by itself, it says, "Now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another." If you read that verse and you stop, you think it's dealing with taking care, like loving kindness, affection, loving each other, having affection for each other. God told us to do that. And again, you'd be right. And the word there, it's kind of hard to translate. The word is Philadelphia. So when it says brotherly love, I mean, a proper translation would be brotherly love. That's a familial love. You love each other as brothers. But if you read the rest of the paragraph, it's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about affection for each other. He's talking about taking care of each other in a physical and spiritual way. That's why I kind of like the Kingdom New Testament translation, where he chose to go this route. He says, "Now about charitable concern for the whole family." Well, now you're dealing with what Paul is actually talking about. The rest of the verse continues on. It says, "I don't really need to write to you because you yourselves have been taught by God to show loving care for one another." All right? So that's basically what it boils down to. Is this is talking about taking care, charitable love for each other. It's more than just an affection. It's loving each other. And so what is Paul getting at here? Anytime I read things about this topic, I think of these things sitting behind me. These guitars. And so what I want to do to kind of illustrate you is I want to share with you some of my guitars. If you don't know me or know me very well, you may not know that music is a massive part of my life. I'm super passionate about it. I love it. I play guitar all the time. Music has been a major part in my life and bringing me to where I am today, right? The reason I'm even at the church I'm currently at is because Jake, our worship minister, asked me to help him as he did his auditions or whatever you would call them for his position when he was interviewing. So it's music, just everything has brought in everything. So what I want to do is I want to show you 3 of my guitars and to illustrate what Paul is talking about, right? So the first guitar is this one. This is a early 2000s Austin Stratocaster copy, right? A real Strat is made by Fender, and you might recognize this guitar. This is probably, in my opinion, the most influential guitar in the world. The original one, the Fender one. This is a Chinese knockoff. This is a copy. Honestly, I was surprised that this company's still in business because cheap Chinese knockoff companies like this tend to go out of business pretty quick because they don't make very good stuff. But back in 2000, my parents bought me this. They spent probably about $100 on it. It sounds terribly. It looks okay. For a $100 guitar, it don't look bad. But it's unplayable. Compared to a good guitar, this guitar is unplayable. The strings buzz. Currently, it's being used for my 4-year-old to learn how to keep rhythm. We're not worried about him playing anything on it, but he's worried about keeping rhythm with it. And for that, it's fine. But if I were to plug it in and play it, you'd be like, oh, okay, something's not right there. But this guitar launched me down the path of music. right? This guitar, I remember bringing it over to my friend's house, and us like thinking we were the coolest guys ever because we could play Smoke on the Water, like we thought we were awesome. My first guitar lesson was on this guitar, and by guitar lesson I mean my dad said, "Here's the G chord, C chord, and D chord. Figure it out." But like this launched me down the path that led me to where I am right now. This $100 cheapo Chinese-made guitar. This. All right. The next guitar I want to show you is this one. This is an Epiphone Les Paul from 2006, it looks like. And this is probably the second most influential guitar in Western history. Like this is, originally they were made by Gibson. They still are made by Gibson. The official ones are. This guitar is stinking heavy. It weighs about 9 pounds. Gibson owns the company Epiphone, and that's what this is. This is made by Epiphone. It is, again, a Chinese knockoff, but this is a lot nicer knockoff. Back when they were selling these models exactly, a lot of touring guys who weren't like rolling in the dough, which is most of them, a lot of those guys who played Les Pauls would buy these for about $400 or $500, rip out all the guts, and spend another $400 or $500 upgrading the pickups, the electronics, having the fret redone. They would basically upgrade everything they could and still have a guitar a third the cost of the American one. So it's not a terrible guitar. As a matter of fact, this guitar has seen a ton of gigs. I played so many shows with this, and I've lent it to other guys who played so many shows with this. But the significance of this guitar for me is this is where I got saved. This is where I found Jesus. I grew up in the church. Just to share a little bit of my testimony, I grew up going to church. My parents took me every time the doors were open. And I would say I've always believed in Jesus. But around high school time, I was as far away as you could get. Like, I never stopped believing in him, but I was not saved. I was not a Christian. I identified as one back then, but I wouldn't say I was, looking back. And, being so heavily involved in music, I worshiped music. I worshiped, these rock stars. They were my idols. I loved them. I worshiped them. I wanted to be them. And so I used every opportunity I could to get on stage or to play or be involved in music. And so our high school, we did really big productions of musicals every year. And I think that year we were doing Little Shop of Horrors, the Rick Moranis movie. And the score there, that we had a pit. We always had a band come in and play with us. And the guitar player, he had a Fender Strat. And, I love Fender Strats. And he could play. I was like, man, this dude is killing it. He can get me to the next level. Like, I arrogantly and naively thought, like, I'm as good as I can get by myself. I need somebody to show me the next level so I could be even more awesome. And I asked him, I was like, dude, do you give your guitar lessons? And he's like, yeah, I do. I was like, what? I asked him how much. He told me, and I said, well, put me down for one. He said, okay, meet me next Tuesday at this church. And I was like, okay, maybe like the church lets him give guitar lessons there or something, or he plays in the band. Like, I wasn't anti-Christian. I just really wasn't one. And so I meet him there, and, that $30 guitar lesson or whatever it was, it went from a 30-minute lesson to a 2-hour conversation about Jesus and God. And that's where I made a change. I went from just believing in God to like really making him the king of my life. And it changed my life dramatically. The bands I was in, I quit. I had to stop hanging around with a lot of people. And I started new bands. And I decided I wanted to be a Christian rock star now, which, this was the mid-2000s, so that wasn't that outlandish of an idea. But continuing the story a little bit, one of the bands I was in, my buddy had a DVD of a band called Disciple, and they recorded their show at I think it was Cornerstone Festival. And Disciple is a heavy metal Christian band. I was really into it. I still really like heavy metal music, but in the middle of their set, in front of all these like mosh pits and like metal dudes, the singer Kevin came out and he like threw down. I mean, he threw down the gospel, like in a way that I'd never heard before. Like, it resonated with me in like a way no sermon ever had. And it was like, I want to do that. Like, I want to play music, and then I want to share Jesus with people, like those people who are like me, who are really far from God, who had long hair, dressed in all black. Like, I want to do that. And so like I was super motivated to do that with my life, not realizing that what I was really discovering was my call to preaching. And so a few years later after that, I was in a different group, not quite so heavy metal, but we got to open for Disciple. And so on the back of this guitar, you'll notice cardboard. Underneath, Kevin and the rest of the band they signed it for me. You know, I got to use this guitar to open for the people that God had used to lead me to my calling. If I were to try to sell this guitar right now, it might get $300. It's not worth much. It is well used. The closer you look at it, the more scratches and dents and dried blood and everything else you see on it. It is a workhorse of a guitar that plays okay, sounds okay. I don't ever use it. It stays in the case. You know, it weighs 9 pounds, so it's like stinking heavy. But it's just, this guitar though has enormous meaning to me and has had enormous influence on my life. Now, I want to show you one more guitar. This guitar looks very similar to the first one. This is a 2021 Fender American-made Stratocaster. When I graduated college, I basically stopped buying gear. I didn't buy guitar stuff anymore. My stuff basically just stayed the same for 10 years. And through COVID, I got motivated to, it's time for an update. So I sold a bunch of stuff and, bought this. And this is like, since 2000, this is like what I wanted. This is the dream guitar. This is the same guitar. It's an American made that, if Jimi Hendrix were starting out today and he was getting serious about it, this is what he'd go buy. If John Mayer was starting out, this is what he'd go buy. John Frusciante, Stevie Ray Vaughan, like this is the level of guitar they would buy. It is American made. The finish is different. Those other guitars have poly finishes. This is nitrocellulose. It's a plant-based finish. So the older this gets, the cooler it'll look. The older those get, the worse they'll look. This guitar is only going to go up in value because it's American made. The levels above this, you get into like the luxury. You don't really need it because it doesn't make it play any better stuff, and then custom shop or vintage stuff. So like the next level up is like starts at $4,000. And I'm telling you prices for a reason, right? But this guitar is a $1,200 guitar. Like it's brand new. It's a 2021. It's a $1,200 guitar, and it plays phenomenally. And it sounds incredible. I'm able to make the sounds that Hendrix and Mayer and Frusciante and all these other of my heroes make. Like I'm able to do that with this, and it plays so well. I mean, it's just like I get it, Like when I plugged it in, and it's like I made that sound. Like I did the riff from "Dancing in a Burning Room" by John Mayer. Like I did that riff, and it was like, oh, whoa, like okay, like this and this are not the same thing. Like they may look kind of similar, but they ain't the same. This guitar is a dream of mine. I love it. This is a guitar that a professional, whether it's studio or on the road, this is a guitar they wouldn't hesitate to pick up if they want to play a Strat. Now, if I were to sell a guitar right now, like if I for some reason needed money, I would not sell either of these. And it's not just because they don't really have a lot of value. Like if these were worth the same as that, I still wouldn't sell these. I'd sell that. Even though this is my favorite guitar to play. This is my favorite guitar I've ever owned. It's either this one or the one hiding in the back there. But these guitars are, they're really expensive. This one's a $1,200 guitar. That's a $1,600 guitar. For the sake of time, I'm not going to explain it to you. But these guitars mean and so much more to me than that one. And it's largely because these two are gifts, right? My folks spent money to continue me going down a path that they saw was good for me. And God used that. They used these were gifts out of love for me that led me to a place where I would come to know Jesus, where I would come to discover a calling, and where eventually I would find my career as a preacher through these guitars. When Paul talks about money and he talks about what we're supposed to do with it, that's it. It's not about just giving people money. It's not about just, you need $20, here's $20. It's about using our money to be God's hands and feet. And sometimes that looks like buying your kid a guitar. Sometimes that looks like paying for somebody's water bill. Sometimes it looks like buying somebody a meal. Sometimes it looks like, paying somebody's rent for a month. Sometimes it looks like baking cookies. Like sometimes it looks like, just having a conversation with somebody in a way that means something. Sometimes it's paying for a guitar lesson. Sometimes it's showing somebody how to do something. It's using our resources is about advancing the kingdom. It's about being God's hands and feet in the world around us. And so the church in Thessalonica, Paul says that they were doing a good job of that. They were giving. As a matter of fact, like he had heard that they were giving to all the other churches around. They were taking care of each other because they were family. All right, he said, the Kingdom New Testament translation, again, it says about charitable concern for the whole family, taking care of people's physical needs. He says the Thessalonian church was doing that, and they were doing it really well. But then he urges them to do it more, right? Like if they have the resources to take care of people, take care of Christians, take care of the lost, give, do more of that, increase that. It wasn't like you could do more. Like it wasn't a guilt thing. It was you see the needs. You guys are gifted at this. You're good at this. Do it more. Continue to give. Continue to take care of each other. It's not just send money. It's take care of each other. We'll learn a couple things from that. And the big one is that possibly the Thessalonian church was either bigger and or wealthier than the other churches. Right? Than the churches in Philippi or the church in Berea. Like they're giving to them. And it would make sense because Thessalonica was the economic center of that region. But they continue to give. And it's important that you understand that you give in a way that matters. Like it's not necessarily just physical needs, but I mean physical needs are part of it. You can't look somebody who is starving to death and say, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" and then not give them like food. Like that's the pointless. Nobody's going to listen to you if they're suffering, and you can do something about it. But inevitably, Paul is talking about taking care of their physical needs and taking care of the family. Inevitably, some people are going to abuse that, right? Some people are going to just be like, okay, well, if like nobody's allowed to not have their needs met, if the Christians, if my brothers and sisters are going to take care of me if I have a need, well, inevitably some people are going to be like, well, I'm not going to do anything. I ain't going to work. Why would I work? I mean, we're already seeing, it's implied here that probably some people were like, I'm just going to wait on Jesus to come back. So I'm just not going to do anything. And so some people were being lazy and doing nothing. They weren't working. They weren't giving. They weren't contributing. They're relying on their wealthy people to take care of them, the people who were selling, the people who had businesses. And that's why Paul says, work with your hands as we instructed. And that doesn't mean that every Christian has to be a carpenter or has to, do things with their hands. But back in that day, and honestly still to this day, if you're working with your hands, it's honest work. Right? Somebody who's out there doing a trade, it's honest work. You are working hard and you're earning your paycheck. That's Paul's point. He's saying that don't. It's not to make yourself rich and wealthy. Like it's not like being a stockbroker or something like that. That you sit back and you can manipulate things dishonestly. Like I think that's what he is pointing to. It's not that there's anything wrong with being a stockbroker, but the point is that, there are positions and ways to make money back then as there are today that is dishonest, all the way from like obvious, like stealing and thievery, to, things that are just, underhanded. Do honest work and contribute as best you can. Because Paul would later expand on this when he said that we were to work as though we are working for Jesus, not our bosses, not our slave masters, not the companies we work for. We're to do our work as though it's for Jesus, because that's the proper way to live our lives, is to use what we have for the kingdom, for kingdom expansion, and to give gifts that do that. To take care of each other. As Christians, there's no room for any Christian to suffer. That's crystal clear, and I think a lot of churches miss that. Not pointing any fingers specifically, but you just see that a lot of Christians are suffering. They have needs that aren't met, and they're trying. That's the key part. Paul makes it clear here that if you're not trying to get a job, if you're not trying to work, then you have no excuse. But if you are trying and you're still suffering, there is no reason that your Christian brothers and sisters aren't taking care of you. Like that's what Paul says. Like it's clear here. It's implied here that we have to take care of each other. That if somebody dies and leaves big bills behind and they're a part of the church, the family should not be suffering through that. We should be taking care of each other. And a lot of churches are really good at that too. Like a lot of churches get this, that, hey, we're taking care of each other. That's the message from today, is that our money, our resources, they're given to us to take care of people and advance God's kingdom. That's what Paul is talking about here. And so he finishes up by saying that we should live like this, that outsiders will look in on us and understand us. If you want to know the quality of a religion, look at the people it produces, right? Look at the kind of people that come out of it. Paul is saying that if you're working hard and you're taking care of each other, nobody can point to that and be like, oh, how dare they take care of widows and orphans, you monsters. Like, you can't point at that and be negative. Oh, those people all work really hard and they do honest work. Disgusting. Like, you can't. And that's Paul's point. Like, the benefits of living like this is it shows the world who we really are, the kind of Jesus we have. But if you're lazy, if you're mooching, if you're not putting in the work, if you're not trying to make your life better, and I'm not talking about make yourself more comfortable, but, expand the kingdom, grow spiritually, grow closer to Jesus. If you're not doing those things, then it makes Jesus look bad. The Ten Commandments, one of the big ones is don't use the Lord's name in vain. And while there is a holiness and reverence for God's name, as a Christian, you bear the name of Christ. And so your actions and the way you live your life and the things you do, that's a reflection of Jesus to the world around you. You are representing Jesus. You are using his name in your words and in your actions. And so it's highly important that you get this. That as a Christian, there's no room for just building your barns fuller, to borrow Jesus' illustration, to making yourself just more and more comfortable and not taking care of brothers and sisters in Christ. That's not to say that wealth is bad. Wealth is not bad. Jesus was friends with wealthy people. But the point of wealth and the things we have and the resources we have and the skills we have and the talents that we have are to be used in the service of God, are to be used to expand the kingdom. And so my challenge to you this week is to do some searching. Maybe you're not giving at all, like you're not using your financial resources for any reason other than to just buy yourself toys. That's something I've had to be honest with myself about and ditch some guitars, right? Like, it's easy to be like, I want this guitar, I want that guitar, I want, and whatever it is for you. I want this thing, I want that thing, I want to build my collection, I want to, whatever. Maybe you need to be honest and pump the brakes on that and be like, well, maybe I shouldn't be using that money for this and instead should be, here's this need I see in my life, or here's this person I know that's suffering that I could help. Like, do some honest evaluation. Or maybe the talents you have in your life. Maybe you're really good at, I don't know, like programming or website design, and maybe your church needs a website update, like maybe volunteer or see if there's a way you can get involved. Use your talents in a way to serve the kingdom. Use your resources. Use your whatever it is that you have that God has blessed you with to serve, to expand the kingdom, to use what you have as a gift to give. And so that's my challenge for you this week. And I think that's Paul's challenge to the church in Thessalonica, to use what you have, even if you are doing something, to do more. And so I hope this week was helpful to you. Hopefully it was enlightening to you. And as always, we'll see you next week.